Sometimes when we say literacy, folks think, oh, big fancy words.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to learn all these big fancy words. I don't need that.
Right.
But really, it's about being able, like I said, to express yourself. And the more literate you are, the more you have to draw from when you're trying to get a message across. I've seen so many people who've struggled, like, no, you're not understanding me. You're not listening. And, so much can be said for literacy helping you to be able to communicate effectively so that somebody else can understand you and understand where you're coming from.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am excited to have a wonderful guest with me today. Her name is Jessica Wernli, and she'll tell you what she does, but I've been in workshops with her, and she's just fabulous. I'll let her tell you all about that. So, Jessica, thank you for joining me today on Literacy Journeys with Linda.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jessica, I just want you to tell me about your literacy journey. What I'm impressed with you is that you're very well-read, well-spoken, well-written, and how did that happen? Tell me about your childhood literacy experiences.
Looking back, I was just reflecting on this over the past couple of days, and, my family really made reading a fun thing. Like, we always just considered that to be a fun activity. All of my aunts read, my grandma, they always exchanged books.
Oh.
They were always reading. And so I remember, being in grade school and starting to learn how to read.
Mm-hmm.
And they would always, I would be doing my homework at the table, and I would have my mom, my grandma, and my aunt around me, just kind of talking amongst themselves, but also paying attention to what I was doing
Mm-hmm.
and helping me. And whenever I would figure something out, they would just get so excited. Like, I remember learning contractions, and like my aunt would be sitting next to me, and when I would do the right contraction, she would just like cheer me on.
Yeah.
And so it was just a fun, exciting thing. So when I was young, I associated reading and words with fun. We would take trips to the library, and it was almost like taking a trip to the store to pick out a toy, right? We got to pick out our books. It was just like a little adventure. So my family just made reading a fun thing for us.
And I love how you said you have a library card. Do you
Yes.
still have one?
I still do, yes.
I think once you get a library card as a child, you just always want to have it,
Yes.
You always want to have
I don't go as much as I should now, but it's definitely, when I do go, I'm like, it just reminds me, oh, this is kind of fun. There's just like a whole world there. So.
Yeah, you can. It's more than just books. My library has a coffee bar.
Nice.
You learn how to read. How about literacy later on in your high school years?
Mm-hmm. So high school years, I just remember, I probably didn't pay attention to it as much when I was, in high school and getting older. And then I started paying attention to it more, even after college when I got into my professional life. But I know that I always, because it was such a big part of my learning early on, it moved into the high school years where I just was kind of a natural at it by then. So I wasn't necessarily intentionally really focusing and trying to cultivate that, but I was already kind of naturally good at it. So I didn't have to work as hard. So I know that I definitely got good grades in English and things that just kind of came really easy to me. And I think it's because I was cultivated at such a young age.
Can you tell us what do you do, Jessica?
Yeah, so I am a community organizer, facilitator, and trainer. And everything I do is really geared towards transformative community change. And it really has community organizing at the heart of it. So even when I'm facilitating groups, when I'm training groups, community organizing is at the heart. Recently I was thinking about it when you asked me about how does literacy fit into your profession.
Yes, how does it apply to your profession? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I never thought about the relationship, but there's a really strong relationship there between literacy and what I do.
Ooh.
As an organizer, I'm constantly working with groups about learning about how to express ourselves in a way that others can understand us.
Right.
And so much of that communication happens in written form, right? So, on our website, when we're trying to describe who we are, what we're trying to do, when we're sending letters or updates to our supporters, people who support our campaign, need to be able to get them to understand where we're at and how they can support. We're writing letters to legislators, and folks who we want to pass policies. Sometimes we're even creating drafts of policies that we want them to pass. And so there's so much that we're writing down, and we want to make sure that we're being understood clearly and that we're conveying our message very clearly and that it's landing with the person who's reading it.
Yes.
And so much of our communication happens written. So even if they do come to an event and they hear us speak, they're going to go home and they're going to Google and they're going to look us up on the website and they're going to read our materials, right? And even at the event, we're handing out materials that has information about the issues we're fighting for, as well as who we are. So there's so much that people consume regarding who we are and our issues that is in written form.
Yes. Now, is it amazing to think about that? Like you said, when I posed that question, you were, yeah, there's a lot of literacy involved.
And as a facilitator, before and after every meeting, there is some really specific communication that needs to go out. In preparation for the meeting, I'm sending materials and I'm writing folks to say, here's what we're going to be focused on. And then in following up, I try to recap everything we talked about in a way that summarizes it well and makes sense to people.
Yes.
So I spend a lot of time just thinking about how do I, because it seems easy, just type what you talked about, but you want to write it and explain it in a way that folks are really going to clearly understand what was discussed, because then that becomes the record for later, right? That they can refer to. Definitely emails and notes associated with meetings, because there's lots and lots of meetings involved with what I do. And then, like I said, writing communications to the larger group of supporters that want to know how they can get involved with what we're working on too. Spending a lot of time writing. So yeah, when I think about it, I spend lots of time writing.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of times we just take all that for granted, our literacy, but it's a very fundamental, important skill that all of us need to have. Why do you think literacy is important in general, not just for your profession, but would you say that it's important?
Yeah, I definitely think it's important. And I think that, professionally and personally, that a huge benefit of literacy is the ability to express yourself. That is one way that you convey who you are and just the message that you're trying to relate to another person, to a group of people. So I even think back to, we kind of talked a little bit about my time as a younger child. My family lived in a women's shelter for about 6 months. And this was when I was around 5, 6 years old. And after we had left the shelter, there was a threat of it being closed down. And so my mom took me to a hearing about it. Yes. And we met with a bunch of other women. And she said, all right, we're going to go to this hearing. And, it's a public hearing, so I need you to write a statement in case you have to speak.
Wait a minute. So, asked you as a little kid, did you even know how to write at 5, 6 years old?
Yeah, this was, so we were in the shelter when I was about 5, and then this was when I was about 6, 7. So I just really knew how to write. So she had me write the little bit that I could, so that I could remember what to say. And also we could leave letters. This was a way of, think ahead of what you want to convey and what your message is so that you can express yourself when the time comes. Mm-hmm. And so that's really stayed with me up through even to my profession in terms of what's the message I'm trying to convey and how can I really express what I mean with, my emotions, my stories, how do I make sure that gets through to other people?
Tell us what happened with the shelter. You said they were going to.
Yeah, so, they were potentially going to close it down. So they had this public hearing. And then I went with my mom and there was just this room just full of women. And I remembered some of them from my time at the shelter. And I was just thinking about how awesome it was that they all showed up to just have this collective voice, right? And just say, this thing really matters to me and I'm going to fight for it. And so it was just a really good image for me to see that. Just this room full of women using their voice and standing up for something that was really important to them.
Do you think that stuck with you or what inspired you to become a community organizer? I mean, you saw how that worked back then.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how sometimes this was a memory that I had tucked away and forgot about until I went to training to be a community organizer, and to learn about organizing and what it was. I was brand new, and folks kept asking me, at the time I was planning on becoming a social worker and going into youth development, and folks kept saying, well, why? And they kept, as a social worker, our cardinal response typically is, because I want to help people.
Sure.
It would push me on that to say, but why though? Dig deeper. What does this have to do with what's important to you, right? It can't just be about others. And so, I was thinking about power and when I first started learning about power, because community organizing is all about building power. And through people just kind of digging deep and saying, well, tell me about your childhood. When did you experience things like this? And the memory just kind of resurfaced, some things that are happening subconsciously, and through these conversations, through communication, they start to resurface. And I just remembered that story that I hadn't even thought about for years and years.
Isn't that something? Wow, that's great. Well, Jessica, I want to just close by asking you, is there anything else that you could say to encourage someone who maybe thinks, I don't need to read or write, or, what for? I got the TV or whatever. What can you say to encourage them to be a literate person?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, sometimes when we say literacy, folks think, oh, big fancy words.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to learn all these big fancy words. I don't need that.
Right.
But really, it's about being able, like I said, to express yourself. And the more literate you are, the more you have to draw from when you're trying to get a message across. I've seen so many people who've struggled, like, no, you're not understanding me. You're not listening. And, so much can be said for literacy helping you to be able to communicate effectively so that somebody else can understand you and understand where you're coming from.
That is so great. I really like how you put that. The goal is really conveying so that people can understand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jessica Wernli.
Thanks for having me.
Community organizer. This has been really great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to Literacy Journeys with Linda. You've been listening to Jessica Wernli, a community organizer, trainer, and facilitator in the St. Louis area. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Bye.